All right, quick tips with Adode Media. Let's talk about podcast marketing and how to get in front of your target audience. So, oftentimes when you are launching a podcast, you often are trying to figure out how to start it, what equipment, what should you be doing. But I always say the starting a podcast piece can be the easiest part. Feel free to take a look at our past video on how to start a podcast. But the marketing piece is a little bit more nuanced. So I'm going to break this down in a few different segments, and I hope you guys find a little bit of value here. So first and foremost, you want to identify who your target audience is. This is actually one of the most important steps in marketing. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, wait a minute, shouldn't I have done this at the how to start part? You definitely should have, but there needs to be some data. So like when you think of marketing and identifying your audience, you have to go a little bit deeper, a little bit more granular. And for a lot of brands and creators, you may not have figured this piece out when you were launching your show. So when I say how to identify your target audience, you need to know their demographics. You need to understand where they spend their time. This piece is very crucial because it helps you determine how and what platforms you utilize to get in front of them. Identifying and understanding who they are helps you determine what type of topics should you be talking about and in what manner. For example, with our How to Start a Podcast video, I struggled, if I'm being completely honest. I first recorded one whole video in a way that I thought was beneficial. I felt like there's so many videos out there that are talking about equipment, that are talking about hosting platforms. I'm going to talk about the more nuanced pieces. And at the end of it, I realized, or should I say, my team said, hey, nobody cares about this piece when they're just starting their podcast. These are things that you're noticing that people need help with. But in actuality, when you are wanting to be discovered and you want people to engage with your content, you actually have to meet them where they're at and then infuse some of those other pieces. This is why it's very important to understand who you're talking to with each one of your episodes. It makes a world of a difference, and it also helps you streamline things. I know it can be difficult for brands and even for creators to do that because you're like, I have these specific things I want to talk about. But here at Adode Media, we help you infuse what your audience wants to hear from you, coupled with what messaging you want to put out there to the world. So that first step of identifying who they are, what they do, their demographic information, their location even, it helps understand, okay, if my target audience, at least for me, are small business owners, corporations, and creators in the local Atlanta market, and they spend their time here, they do this, they have this amount of disposable income, they need support with this. It helps me format what these videos will be about. And it also can help you format how you go about marketing in a local market. Next up is leveraging your different promotional avenues. Now, social media is a very difficult one. And I'm just going to be honest, because the algorithm and so many things are changing all the time that it can be hard to stay abreast of everything. I'm sure you've heard me say this before. Trying to keep up with social media feels like a job all of its own, which is why there are social media managers. That's a large piece of what we do here at Adode. We do help people with managing and creating a strategy for your social. But if you're doing this internally, if you are trying to figure out, okay, how do I leverage my socials? The first thing I would always say is first determine what platforms you are good at. And let's hope that your audience is also there. The reason I say this is consistency is key. So if you start creating content on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat even, and all of these other avenues, it can be very difficult to keep abreast on every last one of these channels because you're just one person, or if you have a social media manager, it can even still lead to burnout there. So it's also like easy to say, oh, I want to be everywhere, but is your target audience there? If you're talking to people in their 70s, I strongly doubt you need to be on Snapchat as well as TikTok. You probably want to focus your energy and your efforts on Facebook. And millennials, you might want to focus your efforts on Instagram, so on and so forth. So those things make a difference in understanding, one, it ties into that first piece of understanding who your audience is, where they spend their time. And that ties into our second piece of utilizing and leveraging socials. But with marketing and social media, I hate to bust your bubble, but the one thing I always like to make sure I point out is that Podcasting is a very different nuance. So the notion that I see a clip or I hear a clip on Instagram, TikTok, or whatever the platform may be, and then I immediately leave that social platform to head directly to a listening platform such as Apple, Spotify, Google Play is no longer, but whatever the listening platform, iHeart, Pandora, to listen to your podcast right away, it's a little slim to none. I know what podcast was that? I think it's Shan Boudry's podcast. She had a very viral moment, or even Cat Williams' viral moment. And I remember I saw it several times. I said, oh, okay, this looks like a lot was going on. I saw several clips across several different people's pages, and it took me 2 weeks before I actually took action to go listen and see what it was about. Maybe a week, actually, to go see what it was actually about. Because at that point, it was like, okay, wait a minute. This has now been in my face so much that I'm curious. When in actuality, you may not have the ability to create that same buzz. So set realistic expectations of you're creating brand awareness through social media and not so much of direct correlation, meaning it's not that I posted on social, everybody who liked it or viewed it on social media will immediately go watch it on YouTube or immediately go listen to it on Apple. That's just not how social media marketing works for podcasting. It's really more so for brand awareness and reach. And some of the strategies you can utilize there is collaborating with other creators and influencers. One of the best things that I feel like a lot of people don't tap into more of is staying in their own little silos. And I actually find that a lot of brands and podcasters and creators don't always listen to other podcasts within their same niche. So let's say you have a relationships podcast. Well, you need to look at other people within your niche. If you have a food podcast, what are other food podcasters? Because you know that their listeners are people who are interested in the content already. And that's the big piece about social media is that you are putting content out there and it's going out to a bunch of people, but you don't actually know if any of these people, one, listen to podcasts, two, are interested in the content that you are sharing. And we know it doesn't always just show to every last one of your followers. So by collaborating with other creators and influencers in your niche, it allows for you to get in front of their audience. And it allows for you to grow your audience because if they like their content, more so likely they'll like yours. Next up in the marketing funnel is SEO and discoverability. Now, this is a piece that I feel like across the board, whether it's a brand, a creator, a lot of people just aren't tapping into SEO. And I think as social media has really taken off over the years, it has a lot to do with that. So let's talk through that. SEO looks like blog content. It looks like infusing keywords in your show notes. It looks like doing the research to understand what those keywords are. Here at Adode Media, we use a lot of internal tools, websites, everything from TubeBuddy to vidIQ for YouTube to Google Trends, and so much more in order to understand, okay, what are the keywords that should be infused in this episode's show notes? And so that's taking the episode topic, the title, and infusing the title with keywords that people are searching for, as well as infusing the show notes. Your show notes are actually a really huge tool that a lot of people just don't spend a lot of time on because it's like, oh, the content is here. They're going to watch my video. They're going to listen to it. And people don't put enough emphasis into the writing and the breakdown of said content. And so in doing so, it allows for you to be found when somebody Googles that specific topic. So let's say, this is about podcast marketing 101. Well, when we do the video show notes, we're going to make sure we infuse keywords, tags, all of those different elements so that this way, when somebody is searching of how to market my podcast, they'll be able to find our content. Along with this is your website. I know it's easy to look at social media as your landing page, as your proof of concept. And oftentimes, so many people have moved away from having a website, but Google and YouTube are the two biggest search engines in the world. And so with Google, it is still very much so pulling from websites, the keywords that you have. I always use this example of when you search for Atlanta Podcast Studio, you will find Adode Media on the first page of Google. The reason for that is we have SEO keywords, we have rich text, we have a blog, we have geotagging on photos and videos and all of these pieces to draw people when they're searching for an Atlanta podcast studio to find us. The same concept applies for your podcast. Having a blog that goes with each episode, and it could be transcribing the episodes and then condensing it into a summary. But having those keywords on your website directly allows for you to drive marketing directly to you, drive your audience directly to you. It's very easy for people to say, oh, I'm going to just have it go to my podcast player, have it go to my YouTube channel. And I always say, what is your return on investment? Like, what is your goal and the initiative that you're doing to grow this podcast? Here at Adode Media, when we work with clients, our big thing is helping you develop, one, what your value proposition is, two, helping you understand like what your return on investment is here. Is that more clients to your business? Is that more consumers? Is that just listeners? Is that people signing up for your newsletter? What does that look like? And then you kind of build your strategy backwards from there. So your website really does serve as a huge hub and a way for people to discover your content, your services, your business, as well as what your end goal is. Next up is building a community around your podcast. Now, this one is not something I actually recommend often. And I've actually done this before, and that's why I don't recommend it. In 2024 and beyond, building community is actually the huge thing because I do really think that we are missing that human connection. So with that in mind, people want to connect with other people who have similar interests, similar goals. And if we all like true crime podcasts, for example, or we all like podcasts about being a doula or gardening, whatever the case may be, it's very easy to feel like, ooh, let's build a community together. This is great for the community and the audience that you're building, but it can be a lot for you as the business and the creator because of what goes into building community. There's a lot of forums, there's Q&As, there's IG lives. There's basically creating ways for people to get in front of you and access to you. And I think in beginning stages, when you're building something, very easy and it feels like, oh, this is amazing. But when you're building a community, there's now these expectations. And granted, there are expectations from your audience in general and your target audience, but it's different when you've built kind of a relationship with your audience. But that's a part of marketing. And so I always say, I don't recommend it because it can lead to a lot of burnout very quickly. And I think the goal of building a podcast is to keep it up and to utilize it as a sustainable tool within your arsenal. And so adding something that may be a little overwhelming, not what I recommend, but I do always like to talk about it as a really great marketing initiative. I know for my old podcast, it made a world of a difference because my community often listened to it, they shared it, they talked about it, they included it in their newsletter. It really helped with our growth and our initiatives. Each episode was getting about 5,000 downloads, all of these things, and not from necessarily the work that I put out. An episode hasn't gone live with that podcast in years. Yeah, it's been about a year or so since an episode has gone live, but on a weekly basis, that show still gets anywhere from 200 to 300 downloads a week because of that community, because it's still being utilized as a resource because it was a podcast about how to start a podcast with different people within the industry giving their expertise. So it's evergreen content. But having that community and being able to host Q&As, tap into your resources, have them include you in their elements really does help with your growth and sustainability as far as your show. But you have to think of your bandwidth specifically. Last but definitely not least is collaborations and cross promotions. I know I talked about collaborating as it relates to social media. So that's collaboration post, maybe doing an IG live with one of your guests or something of that nature. But when I talk about collaborations and cross promotions, I'm talking about podcast swaps, ad swaps, feed drops. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, Anna, what in the world does that actually mean? So let's quickly break that down. A podcast or a feed drop is where basically if you and somebody else that are both podcasts, both brands, have the same target audience, talk about things that are quite similar to each other, you then have the ability to reach out and do a swap, meaning they host an episode on a topic that maybe you guys agree together, and you host an episode, and then you're basically dropping each person's episode into your feed, meaning into your RSS feed, or that goes live on Apple or your YouTube channel, whatever the case may be. And I've helped a few clients with this. Like I had a client, the Vets Unleashed podcast, and then the Animal That Changed Me podcasts. These are two podcasts that were about animals. They actually knew each other in real life. So it was actually quite an easy sell to say, hey, I think this would be really good for you guys to grow your audiences. And they did a swap and it went really amazingly. So that's a feed drop or swap. Another one with that is promo feed. So promo drop. That's where I do an ad for your podcast in my podcast. So if our podcasts are quite similar, I want to get in front of your audience, you want to get in front of mine, I then say, hey, I will record a 10-second drops of like, this is who we are. You can tune into us. This is what we talk about. And we kind of swap. A lot of people aren't tapping into that. And I think there's power in numbers and power in community, in the sense of working and collaborating with others within your niche makes the world of a difference because the audience is already interested in that content. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, what about ads? What about this? What about that? Those things can come in time. I'm very big on starting off with a few elements and then building from there to see what works and what doesn't. So let's do a quick recap on podcast marketing 101 and what are the things you should kind of have in mind. Item number 1 is identifying and understanding your target audience. Where do they spend their time? What social platforms are they on? What do they like to do? What are their demographics? And then developing content based off of that information. You can utilize tools such as Google Trends, Ask the Public, all of these elements to find out what that target audience is searching for online and then create your content around that. Item number 2 is leveraging social media for promoting. And so that's utilizing social media as a tool for brand awareness and not always for the tool to drive direct traffic to your actual podcast listening platform or YouTube. So you want to make sure that you are creating content that is specific and then still on brand. Next up is item number 3, which is SEO and Discoverability. That's a website. That's having a blog. That's transcribing your content and making sure you have keywords that are rich that can be in your show notes, your blog content, as well as your episode titles. Those things make a world of a difference in how people discover your content. Item number 4 is building a community around your podcast. I know I indicated it's not my favorite, and that's just because of the fact that it's so much work that can go into it. But what that entails is hosting like lives, Q&As, even doing where like your audience can ask you questions and you can infuse that into your shows. Here at Adode, we utilize a few tools where people can actually leave you voice messages on your website so that way we can edit it into your actual podcast episode and do it as a live situation of, hey, if you submit this question on our website, we'll include you and give you a shout out. People absolutely love that. And last but not least is item number 5. Is collaborations and cross promotions. So when I talk about collaborating, it's finding people in your niche. I know it's easy to be like, oh, I love this show, but guess what? If you guys aren't speaking apples to apples, you're not going to get the right audience. It has to be somebody who you guys talk to the same audience and sometimes are on the same playing fields. I know it's easy to be like, oh, I want to reach out to this brand because they have all these listeners, all these followers, but you have to make sure it's equally advantageous for the collaborator as well. So I hope you found this information helpful. And if you realize that actually this is a lot and I just need some assistance or consultation from a specialist who can help me figure out where to get started or take it completely off my plate, reach out to us here at Adode Media. We are a full service creative agency specializing in everything from podcast production, email marketing, branding and design, and so much more. We would love to help you. So head over to adodemedia.com. And I hope you found this information helpful. And until next time, have a good one.